Hi, my name is Sid Davis. I'm the Director of Music and Fine Arts at St. Luke's United Methodist Church, and this is Methodantics, investigating dusty ideas. And I'm here with my friends, Justin Bair, who's going to introduce our other friend in just a moment. But we're here to answer questions that you may have about the worship service, about the building itself, about things in the building, which is going to be particularly what we talk about today. And so here's Justin.
As Sid said, my name is Justin Bair. I'm an Associate Director of Worship and Music here at St. Luke's. And as you can see, we've been doing this, I think this is our 15th episode. It's definitely up there. And this is the first time that we've had 3 boxes on our screen, and it won't be the last. So in our third box down below, I will let him introduce himself.
Actually, I'm up on the top row where I think I should be.
Oh yeah, I probably should have noted that.
Well, I am Jim Roman, and I'm the Associate Organist here at St. Luke's. And I'm probably one of the only organists that has more than one friend, so this is really cool.
This is all of them.
This is it, yeah. Organists are known as kind of antisocial loners.
So I asked Jim if he would join us today because as I am still very much in a process of learning kind of the worship culture and style of not just Methodism in general, but also St. Luke's and traditional worship. I was struck by coming from a very, what people would consider a contemporary or modern worship background. Coming to St. Luke's, I loved seeing the organ and I loved hearing the organ, but to me, it was really just sort of another worship instrument or another way that people chose to worship was kind of alongside the organ or having the organ help lead them in that. But the more I got to know people, especially my predecessor, Norlin, one of the first things she was so excited to tell me about when she showed me the office is that she just loved that you could hear the organ from her office now in my office. And that is very true. I hear it much less these days, not being in my office as much. But and then especially during this COVID era of not being, well, for 6 months, having not been in the building at all, just hearing a lot of stories about how people were missing the organ and missing not just the sound and I think the presence of it, but the feel of the organ, because you have, it fills that whole space. And so that really piqued my curiosity and I was interested to hear from Jim. I bother him all the time during his practice sessions. And
well, I bother you with my practice sessions, so.
It's true. And so I allow you to, so I'm just getting back at you. So I asked Jim if he wouldn't mind coming in today and sharing with us the things that he knows about the organ. I assume it's some things. So if you would start, Jim, by just telling us a little bit about how does somebody become interested in the organ and how do you learn how to play that?
Yeah, so I don't really come from what I'd say I call a musical family. Both my parents played instruments. My mom was a flautist. My dad played clarinet. Although I never heard him, and my mom says that's for the best. My mom was like a first chair flautist though in her high school or college even orchestra, but my mom always wanted to take piano lessons, and most organists start out taking piano because it builds a really solid keyboard foundation, so that when you throw the pedals in, it's just like one added element and not like learning how to use all 4 limbs.
Yeah, your piano stacked up.
Yeah, I got 4 here, so. And so anyway, I started taking piano lessons when I was 5 and did that for a number of years, just like everybody. I hated practicing. Some days I still do, but not as much as I used to. And for some reason, I wanted to join a church choir when I was in the 6th grade. And this is sort of one of the big mysteries of my life. I don't remember why I wanted to join a church choir. It just seems like a sort of random thing for me to want to do. And I think my mom doesn't even remember, which is even weirder. And so I joined this church choir that I had a couple friends in, and I grew up Catholic. And so the Catholic church I grew up in didn't have I forgot that was on.
That's how it works, Jim. You press the key. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm learning. Didn't have like a great music program, but the Presbyterian church in town had a really good one. And so my parents said, why don't you join the church choir there? Because they had connections there too. And so on Sunday mornings, I would sit kind of the equivalent of where that chair is over there, where Don Burns usually sits. And so I I kind of knew what was going on up here just because I, had the piano experience, but every Sunday that's sort of where I sat. And so I just was infatuated watching the organist and the choir director play on Sunday mornings, and eventually asked my mom if I could take lessons, and she asked him, and he actually said no. He didn't want to teach organ anymore. He was just, was getting older, and thought there were better teachers. And I really didn't want to study with anybody else because I don't like meeting new people. And I didn't want to meet a new person to learn something new. And I just knew him, and I wanted to take lessons with him. And so she, prodded him a little bit, and he succumbed to the pressure and started taking lessons, and it just sort of snowballed after that. That's your long.
Yeah. So my daughter will be turning 5 in like a month. Do you feel like 5 was a good age to start that? Because she can't sit at my piano at home for more than like 15 seconds.
Yeah, it's such a tricky question because I'm glad I started that early. If you had asked me when I was 5 or 6, I would have said, no, this is too early. I got real creative when it came to finding ways to get out of practicing. So be prepared for, some resourcefulness. My mom would set a timer for 30 minutes, and I'd practice for like 5 minutes, and then I'd go to the bathroom for about 10 minutes and leave the timer running, and I'd come back, and it's like, oh, look, I only have 15 minutes left. And
so nothing's changed, really.
Pretty much. But no, I would say, it's good to get some sort of musical experience and at least get an interest. And you can learn pretty fast at that age, especially at the piano. I wouldn't recommend the organ that young because physically, like, they can't reach the pedals yet or anything like that. And, she probably have trouble reaching up here, but yeah, I don't think it's too early.
Don't you think the organ, for people, congregants, civilians, is the most mysterious thing in there?
Oh yeah, it's a huge mystery. And the organ is a classic case of, like, that picture you see online. It's like the iceberg, and it's like you see the tip of the iceberg, and then underwater it's like this giant thing. I get so many people that say, like, they just think like that's the whole organ right there. So when I ask, like, how many pipes do you think it has? They'll say, oh, I don't know, 50. I'm like, well, sure, 50 plus the 4,000 that are behind that. Because it takes up, the organ here, you can see, it literally goes up to the ceiling, and even like those white panels, it goes above where the pipes are. That's all like mesh fabric.
More than 2 floors, 2-story.
Yeah. And it probably goes back a good 10, 15 feet too. So, and there's organ in the back hidden up in that corner. So, it's.
And an organ in the chapel.
And a chapel, yeah. But yeah, people just have no idea. Some people think just this is the organ, and this is just like the cockpit of the plane, essentially.
And Rob says, and he's right, that second to the HVAC in the building, this is the most expensive thing we have.
Probably, yeah.
So I think one of the things that struck me about coming back to traditional worship, but I say coming back because I was at St. Luke's traditional worship, like during the sanctuary renovation, I guess, what was that, 2014, 2015, something like that. And then went to more kind of modern worship and then back to traditional. And one of the things that I really like is that there isn't a worship leader per se. It's that, especially like our 11 o'clock, the chancel choir is, the whole choir is the worship leaders. And the organ itself is such a big, sort of vast instrument that it's kind of all encompassing when it comes to accompaniments and what you fill that space with. You can accompany one person, doing a solo at the lectern, or the entire 100+ person choir. So the idea that it is the instrument to lead worship led me to thinking about sort of like a historical, was it maybe like first implemented as this is an instrument of the church and this is supposed to lead people in worship in the church? Or was it like, we want to build this thing and the church seems like probably a good place to do it?
Yeah, we don't really know actually when the organ first became incorporated into the church and worship services. Like the earliest examples of an organ-like instrument that we have goes back to ancient Greece. It was called a hydraulis, and it's sort of like I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit, the Orgel Kids organ that we just got recently, where it's a little portative organ. So, I mean, it's probably, I'm sure they vary in size, but you could put it on a table or maybe even on your lap, and it was operated by water and air pressure. So leave it to the Greeks to figure something like that out. But we don't really know. And so, I mean, it was probably used as, just like street music, just street performers that would use it in that capacity. Some people think maybe not, because, like the clock, along with the clock, they were like the two most complex inventions. I mean, the organ's like the first computer, essentially. But we don't really know when it came into worship. And I had a teacher in college, though, that had an interesting thought, and I haven't been able to find a source for this, but I really like it, and it kind of makes sense. If you think about it, back then, there was a much quieter world. There was no planes flying overhead. There was no like music playing on the radio, and apart from maybe like a cannon firing, the organ was probably the loudest man-made sound. So it kind of makes sense that the church wanted to kind of gobble that up and be like, well, this is worthy of God. So I always like that train of thought. I mean, we think that maybe by like the 900s, it was incorporated into churches, but we don't know for sure. And there's all sorts of predecessors.
Right? Probably like something maybe more like the chapel organ to start, or were they like, the gate, they're like the size of walls?
So there was something called the Ferric organ, which essentially was a big, what we'd call a mixture on the organ. So like it had all these multiple ranks or sets of pipes, but you couldn't separate them. You can't just play so like on this organ, we can play, that's one sound. I can play another sound, but on that organ, it was all or nothing. Like you could only play everything or nothing. And that's kind of probably what we think it sounded like, that sort of classic kind of metally organ sound. And so that was probably the first kind of instrument used in worship, or in the church at least, and then it evolved from there.
And getting wind to the organ, other than getting wind to the organ and power to the console, that sort of stuff, the technology is the same as it's been for 1,000 years.
Yeah, essentially.
I jokingly say it's a bag of whistles, and it really is. I mean, it's giant whistles.
Yeah, it's a big box of whistles. My Grace loves when I tell this it's not really a story, but for those who don't know how the organ works when it comes to supplying air, I mean, the air has to be forced into the pipes, and then it comes up through the pipes, and that's what makes the sound when a valve opens. But if you think of like a fireplace and the bellows that you have, it's the same exact concept. Just put that bellow, attach it to a hose essentially, and then put the hose into the pipe, and that's how the organ works. But that all had to be done manually, and these organs would have giant, like huge bellows, and people would have to like stand on one and the other one go up. They'd jump over and they'd stand on that, and it was this constant back and forth. So like I can just come in the afternoon and practice for 2 hours, and it's a one-man job. But back then, before we had electricity, you had to have people actually powering the organ for you. So I think like even in France, they would like find people on the street, like homeless people, and say, hey, want to make a quick buck and come and do this for 2 hours? And
so the organists have friends. Okay, Jim.
Yeah, they paid for their friends long ago.
Exactly. And then they stuck their friends inside a dark, dusty organ and made them work.
So I'm going to reveal a little bit of my ignorance with this, and I'm just going to use Bach as he's like the guy. So he's, I guess the epitome of organists and early church organists, maybe. So I understand in church history and a lot of sacred music that's been produced over the last several centuries was produced kind of by the church, for the church. These were composers that maybe they were like employed by the church, and they would write music like these masses that are so famous. And then I don't know, I don't really know the order. I guess maybe they started in the church or would have concerts in the church, and then that would kind of go into what people would consider like secular society. So would does that mean that somebody like Bach, say, was like first a church organist musician, or was he just sort of a musician and the church would pay him to come do stuff? And then does that mean that Bach could we consider Bach a worship leader? Like, was the organ used in church services where Bach would have been playing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bach's kind of like the church musician.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a Kapellmeister, or he was essentially a music director for a church. And my history is probably a little rusty, so Sid, if I say something wrong, please jump in.
The rusty.
We went to high school together, so I've got the deets.
Yeah, there we go. But yeah, I mean, he had a choir and he played the organ for every service, and all of his music, even at the end of it, he'd inscribe it with Soli Deo Gloria, for the glory of God. So I mean, he truly believed that all the music he was producing was to glorify God. And I mean, at one point, he was writing a cantata a week. And I mean, we're talking like composing, like actually physically writing out all the parts, and then having to have everybody like learn it, and then you'd play it on Sunday, and then you'd start again on Monday and do the whole thing. And it's crazy.
It went with the church season. I mean,
right,
it was an educational tool. And
Mm-hmm.
Bach didn't write stuff that his congregation didn't get. If he wrote a big chorale organ, like a prelude and fugue based on a chorale tune, the congregation knew it. They knew what he was doing because they could hear the chorale tune in there.
Yeah. Well, he was really practical with all of his music.
Very practical.
Like all the cantatas, if you look at them, there's solo movements, and then there's instrumental movements, and then you'll have like the chorale, which is where the congregation would sing because that's what they could do. But he would fill out everything using all of these other resources available to him. But it wasn't like having to have the choir learn a 40-minute cantata every week. They would learn their movement or two, and then the soloists, instrumentalists would take care of everything else. So,
and instruments were super interchangeable. If he only had this set, he could make it work for that. He was very, very practical. It's a shame that we've deified him so, because he must have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
So he one of these like a week. So what are you doing?
Well, it's someone actually, I think it was James Whitbourne, who's become a friend of ours now in the choir. He made a good point that, back then, like, that's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all day. That's what you did.
There were no emails.
He wasn't distracted by Facebook. He wasn't, having to be, send all these emails. He wasn't having to schedule meeting invites. I mean, I'm sure there were other things. Yeah, there's no Netflix, exactly. Although he did a lot of chilling. I mean, he had about 21 children. Sorry, did I just earn this like a PG-13 rating now? Or,
okay, there's a little inside joke there with Justin. That's great. But yeah, he spent all of his time cultivating that craft, where people these days, we just don't have that gift of time, I think, that we can fully concentrate ourselves on something like that, which I think is a shame, because it makes me wonder, like, how many people out there in the world right now could be like the next Bach, but because they're so bogged down and having to, answer emails, that they never reach that potential.
I also will not pretend that I would be like in the same universe of disciplined as somebody like that. So I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, I could totally write a cantata a week if it weren't for Facebook. Facebook is not my problem.
All right, Facebook. Well, it's called the King of Instruments for a reason, and it's supposed to sound like a full orchestra, which ours does, happily. And I've often heard it said that the person who really runs the show on Sunday mornings is the organist. Because, you start with the prelude and go all the way through the postlude, and, you can kind of make things go your way, should you choose.
I can really make or break your Sunday morning, but
there you go.
I try my best not to.
That leads to my next question. Do you find it easy or difficult to feel like a worshiper while you're playing for a worship service?
I think it depends. And it's funny, I was actually talking to one of our pastors here about this a week or two ago, because we were having a small prayer service in the chapel. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a good, high church service with, full choir and organ and the processing and the recessing and all that. But it is hard for me sometimes to really participate just because my mind is like, do not miss this cue, or like, oh my God, I've been practicing this for 2 weeks and I'm so nervous about this one spot that's going to derail the whole choir if I mess up. So it's really hard to, I think, get in the zone of a worshiper, which is sort of a sad thing to say, I know, but when it's a smaller service like those little like Lenten meditation services that we're doing, that's a little easier for me to kind of participate, just because it's not as high pressure. It's just simpler music, and it's just, you're not pulling out all the stops, type of thing. So I think it just really depends on the context of the service. If it's something that I feel like I can actually relax, or if I've just like, I have to stay focused because so many things can go wrong.
Well, I know Jim knows this. I don't know if Justin does or not. I was an organist until I came to Houston, and I've played for many, many weddings, many, many funerals, many, many church services. But when I came to Houston, I worked at a church that had either had 6 organists in 8 years or 8 organists in 6 years. I can't remember. And I decided not to tell them I could play, because clearly they were the destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I never played again. But I had a Sunday school teacher ask me, or say one time in Sunday school when I was a kid, I was the church organist at my little church when I was 14, and say, well, there's no way you could worship while you're sitting at the organ. There's no way. And I was so offended. I hadn't thought about it until that moment, but I was really offended. So it's a huge responsibility.
But I think also it's a different way of worshiping. I mean, like, some people may disagree, but I mean, this what I like to think is my gift. Like, that's my God-given gift. And so me using that in this capacity, is a form of worship. It's not, I don't, me getting up early on Sunday mornings, even though I don't want to, and, getting here early. And
we have an 11 o'clock service, Jim. It's
okay,
after
well,
lunch.
Back in the day.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, so it's not, it's not worship in the traditional sense of you come, you say the prayers, you take communion, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I do that. I think sometimes I probably go through the motions more than I am participating, but I like to think that, this is my gift and my form of worship.
So we could spend an entire other episode just on like the functionality of the organ, which is why I like to come in and bug you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask then just a really rudimentary question that'll give sort of an insight into the versatility of the organ. So how many different distinctive sounds can, let's say, our organ make? Like, I learned recently within the last year that it makes chimes. I didn't know it could do chimes.
We have chimes. Yeah, so our organ has, although there's been some discussion about this between me, Rob, and Jeff Hoover recently, because certain sources seem to imply different things. And so we're actually having a hard time, aside from actually going up there and counting. We're not like 100% sure how many ranks or sets of pipes this organ has, which is kind of silly. I think our latest number is 83. It was 79 for a long time. And it also counts because most of these have an actual set of pipes. And the way that works is, so for each set of pipes, which is one of these draw knobs you see here, there's one pipe for each note. Oh, wrong keyword. And then we have actually 3 digital ranks on this organ. So there's no sets of pipes, it's a speaker. So there's like, do you count that as a rank of pipes? So there's some gray area there. But yeah, so we have between 79 and like 83, I think.
See, I thought you were going to say like 11.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so more.
And the keyboards have names.
They do, yeah. And they kind of differ from
Bob,
various,
Carol,
Shelley.
That's right. Derek.
This is Mike. We're having a little bit of an argument right now. Yeah, it depends on the tradition of organ building, but the typical American layout, which is what we have, is this is the solo up here. Then we have the swell, grate, and choir, and then pedal down here that you can't see right now.
Okay, so we could spend like I'm afraid if we dive in that we're just going to be swimming the rest of the afternoon. So let me ask you, how do you feel? Like we were joking at the beginning of this that, you know, organists don't have very many friends, and which would lead some to guess how many organists are there. So what do you feel like is sort of the state of the organ? Sid doesn't like this phrase, but writ large. I mean, are there a lot of organists out there, or are there a lot of organs not
I
being?
am not gonna lie. I had to look that phrase up when you said that because I'm like, writ large. What is that? Who says that? I mean, it's a pendulum, and I think right now we're sort of in the decline, and I'm, you know, but it's been like that. I feel like people have been saying that for years, so it's just, you know, it's hard to tell. But organists have never been, as much as I hate to admit this, superstars, and there's never been like a million of us because there doesn't need to be a million of us. I mean, each church really only needs one or two.
It's not
Yeah.
like having pianos in every room. There's one organ.
Right. So, you know, there's just never been and never will be a need for, you know, 3 million organists in the state of Texas or something like that. But I'm always surprised. There's always more out there than I think. And I think there's a misconception that most organists, myself included, as of recently, are just old and gray. And
Hey, careful.
I'm always pleasantly surprised how many young organists are out there, which gives me a lot of hope for the future of the organ. Especially when I go to conventions, I'm like, my God, where have all you people been? But it's because we're all holed up in practice rooms. You know, we don't get out, so it's hard to know how many are out there. But you know, it's always been a small, dedicated group of people.
Are there still a lot of universities that have organ programs, or are there like fewer and fewer of those?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a steady decline in that over the years. I mean, the American Guild of Organists every year always publishes a list of like organ majors by degree, and there has been a decline over the years. But I mean, Houston is lucky, and we actually have 4 organ programs here. There's one at University of Houston, Rice University, Houston Baptist, and St. Thomas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who would be the dean of the Houston chapter of the American Guild of Organists?
That would be me.
Wow, Sid, it's almost like you knew that before you asked.
That's what's turning you gray.
Yeah, really. Yes, recently I was appointed dean.
Tell us just real quickly a little something about the Orgel Kids.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. That's Orgel Kids started in the Netherlands as an sort of educational tool to help promote the organ among children. And it did that by letting kids physically build a working pipe organ. And when I say that, people think like build one of these, but it was actually closer to what we were talking about earlier, those hydraulis organs, though it's not powered by water. So it migrated to the US and has a USA version now of this organization. And just by pure coincidence, actually, it was started by the daughter of a former chancel choir member, which I love that connection. And we didn't even know that at first, but it comes in a box, and you know, it's probably no wider than this. And it took us about 45 minutes for 2 of us to build. And it's just a great chance for people to like see like, oh, this is how the mechanism works. Like you can press the key and you can see how it pulls down the lever, and then it opens the valve and the air goes through, and you actually have to have someone pumping the bellows. And it's really fun.
Kids actually get to build it themselves.
Yeah, so kids, and it you know, there's a whole method behind it where they divide up into teams, and this team like puts the pipes together, and this team puts the like just the framework together, and it's a really just exciting thing. And we were very fortunate to have someone who made a gift to Friends of Music recently, and we were able to purchase that. And as soon as we can gather again, we'll, you know, start up our pipe works and pedals, pipes, and pizza events, and let people actually get their hands on it.
I got to be I don't know if bellower is the right word for that, but I got to be a bellower for that.
You did.
And it helped me understand actually like the mechanics of how like the bellows work. Like I know ours has a blower. It's just, I mean, it's a machine that's constantly pumping air in, but I always wondered like, how are you pumping air in and then like pulling air in without the sound stopping? But got this big heavy weight on top. So as long as you just keep pumping it in, that weight just kind of almost like a bagpipe where you sort of fill it up and keep squeezing, and it was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Since it's so tiny, it's really going to be pipes and pizza rolls.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Gigabytes.
That's a good idea. We'll have to talk more about that. But kind of going back to its use in worship, that's something that I always like to refer to the organ as sort of like the lungs of the church, because it sort of is. It's close to how the human voice works, which is why I think it is so unique and compatible for worship services, because we're sort of like a pipe. The air, our lungs press the air, and our valve up here, and sound comes out here. Like they even call it, if you can see, these are called the mouths of the pipe. And there's little things on the bottom that you can't see. They're actually called beards. And on the side, there's two pieces, and they're called ears. So it really is, comparable. And I think that's why the organ is so perfect for hymn singing, especially because the way it functions, it can sustain pitch. On the piano, you press a note and immediately the sound starts to die. And so it's, especially in a huge room like this, it's not great for accompanying hymns because, the human voice can sustain, but the piano starts dying, and so you need amplification. But the organ, that pitch will go as long as I hold this key down and the air is piping, being pushed in. So it really is perfect for supporting congregational singing because it can have that sustained sound, and it has the ability to, without artificial amplification, fill a room full of people.
We have a great one, and that's due in such huge part to Rob and his vision for when the organ was rebuilt in 2000, right?
2001.
Yeah. It's a wonderful instrument and great musicians. We have great musicians here too, but visiting musicians are always impressed with it, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And it was kind of redone again during the sanctuary renovation. Those front pipes were added and the trumpets at the top. And
yeah, everything you see pipe-wise was all 2014 and 16, I think. That was all additions. Because it all used to be grill work with that kind of red, I'm trying to point here, that red sort of cloth all across the grill work, right?
Yes.
Everything was just hidden. Yeah.
Yes. That's right.
And there were fake pipes that were on either side that I think are still laying in Rob's backyard against the fence.
Those little facade pipes, yeah.
And actually, people don't know this, but only this set here are actually speaking pipes. The rest of these are all non-speaking pipes. They're just there for show.
The things you learn.
Yeah. That's the only reason I'm on staff. I'm sort of
life is a lie.
Yeah, which actually makes me wonder if they're included in the pipe count. Like the pipe count, does that include non-speaking pipes? It's like, this is why we have so much gray area.
I vote that y'all go up there and count them.
Sure, that'll be maybe next week.
So the episode, well, Sid's going to say our final question for today.
So we are looking back. Justin asked me to look back at Facebook, what we put on Facebook a year ago, which if I were more savvy, I would know how to do that exactly, but I'm not, so I don't. But I remember exactly what I put on Facebook about this time, a little bit later, because, at first we thought, well, we shut down for 2 weeks, and then we're like, maybe 4 weeks, and is it possible that we would actually do Easter not gathering together? Was that possible? Could it happen? And I put on Facebook, I think we're about to learn that Easter can happen without fanfare. And it was sort of liberating in a way that, Easter comes, Christ is risen, whether we have a brass quintet or not. So that was my Facebook memory.
And we're still kind of hybrid in that. We are going to have in-person Easter services, but nothing compared to what we had any year previously. And last year Easter was all from homes. It was all just recorded on people's phones.
And we were so nervous.
I know.
And what was your memory?
It's so funny because it's perfect for this episode. I had ordered, it's just called a paper organ online, and it's literally, it's all these little paper cardboard parts that you kind of punch out and then you glue them together, and it builds like a functioning pipe organ, almost like Orgel Kids, but just a little more poorly constructed. And so I had posted, I'll have Grace post this, but I think I had completed the first segment of it a year ago today, my first 5 keys, and I was so excited about it. And I thought, this is going to be a great project. I'm home for 2 weeks. I can just knock this out and it'll be fun. And
Little did you know you could have built a real organ.
yeah, right. So we've upgraded from that now to the Orgel Kids, but yeah.
What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I had, as I was looking at it, I had 2 that were of note. The first one was, we had been sent home. I say sent home, like they shut everything down. It was quarantine. They had closed the offices. I want to say it was like March 17th, maybe 16th. Or this may have been the first day. And I posted that it was the first day in several days that I left the house at all. We had just kind of been cooped up because I needed to come to the office to pick up a few things to work from home. And I fully expected, this is when people were kind of panicking about groceries and can we go out and buy anything? And then they bought all the toilet paper that existed. And I expected a ghost town. I mean, I expected it to look like it was, 2 o'clock in the morning, just a car here every now and then, and nothing had changed. I was driving by like down Westheimer, and people were sitting in cafes and people were eating at restaurants. And we'd already been put on a social distancing order. And I had written that, I think we need to put social distance in really big air quotes because I think this is going to take a little bit longer. And as it turns out, it did.
1 year later.
And that's right. We're still there. ...
1 year later. Well, and I had also posted, I guess it was probably the first day that we had worked from home all day. And in my last house, we've since moved, but in my last house, I had these little French doors with glass panels. That was our office. And Lauren and I had to switch off working in that office, and Nora, my then 3, almost 4-year-old, would just come and like breathe on the glass and like write markers on the glass. Like as I'm trying to work, I'm on Zoom calls and she's like 4 feet to my right, just like breathing and making shapes. And this is what it's like trying to work from home. And that was when like the flatten the curve and 2 weeks to flatten the curve things were, popular. And I'll never forget that it was 80 straight days of quarantine with not being able to go anywhere, no help. Working from home with both girls was memorable.
I know it's pointless to think about this, but I do wonder, like, what if people had actually listened? Like, would we be having a regular Easter, in a couple weeks?
Yep.
We'll never know.
Well, Jim, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
At the same time next week for like the technical aspects of how, like, breaking down how the organ works, part 2.
We'll push that one a little bit. We don't want to inundate people with organ.
Only if get the pipes counted between now and then.
Okay.
It's true. That's your next assignment. You let me know. We'll schedule it.
I'll let you know.
Cool. Have a good afternoon, man. Thank you.
Thanks.
Justin's going to tell, if you have a question you want to email us, me or Justin or Jim, Justin's going to tell you how to do that.
sdavis@stlukesmethodist.org is Sid's email. Mine is jbair@stlukesmethodist.org and jroman@stlukesmethodist.org. I didn't even have to rehearse that, Sid. That was just...
That's why I keep you around. That's why I keep you.
Well, I'm going to keep practicing that. Thanks, Jim.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Bye.